Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode 13 of the ESG Show. Unlucky for some, but I'm sure it'll be fantastically lucky for us. Before we kick off, I wanted to tell you a little bit about a survey that we did, and as if by magic, and it appears on the screen. We asked, what do you think we can do to bridge the gap between E, S, and G? And the most popular response was standardized ESG reporting, which I think is a thing that's come across in a lot of the discussions we've had, actually. And then just a fraction behind, education and awareness. New policies way back, and CSR legal legislation, only 4% referred to that. We also had quite a few respondees from that. Yusura Salam said, standards will become a tick box exercise by time. Guidance reference is better than standards. Okay. And Mark Venave said the SDGs were also created with a similar purpose to make a better world, but business to cherry pick those SDGs that would make their brand look better and that they have direct control over. Many SDGs are most likely indirect, though their supply chain, so they are not focusing on those ESGs. ESG is similar, trying to make a difference, but are not so enthusiastic to push it through the whole supply chain. In my view, ESG is a neoliberal market driving tool. A business that really wants to make a sustainable difference doesn't need all this. All that this does, it is because it is the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. Okay, and Nanya Hurley, I changed my reply a few times and I can't stop thinking about it. Good, glad to have got you thinking, Nanya. I have no doubt that education and awareness has to be top of the list. ESG, so much that there's always more to learn, and showing all of its diverse, not only the E, the S, and the G, but how it affects the company and all its shareholders is essential. At the same time, though, not having a standard makes all conversations about ESG harder. What exactly are we measuring? How are we measuring? How do we know it's greenwashing, or is it actual green commitment? In this company, is this company really pro-diversity, or just a pride mouth rainbow washing ad campaign? That's very poetic. Having standardized reporting helps companies with their reporting, but it also helps all of us understand what's being reported and to compare different companies on their efforts. The comparison isn't only to say who's best and who's worst, but it also helps to build a plan, and it's also a wonderful resource for education. Okay, well, it's good to get some comments to that. Now, a couple of weeks ago, during the ESG show, I referred to the movie Jaws. Now, I think this film is underrated. A Steven Spielberg masterpiece of great dialogue and suspense and music as well, in my opinion. If you're not familiar with the movie, or you haven't seen it for a long time, the plot involves a great white shark attacking humans swimming in the sea off the coast of a fictitious seaside resort called Amity Island. The local police chief wanted to ban people from swimming. The local mayor was worried about the impact on local businesses.
It's all psychological. You yell barracuda. Everybody says, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
So I rather like that line. You yell shark, we've got a panic on our hand on the 4th of July. So what has all that got to do with ESG? Well, it's just got me thinking. Let's set aside the human cost of shark attacks. After all, worrying about the social consequences is a bit woke, isn't it? Sorry, that's sarcastic. The mayor was using faulty economics, in my opinion. His mistake was in how he calculated risk. He focused on the short-term economic damage of the police chief creating a panic, but totally failed to factor in the longer-term economic consequences on Amity businesses of a string of shark attacks. Of course, in the case of the movie, short term meant tomorrow and long term meant the rest of the summer. He also persuaded himself that shark attacks were unlikely was because he was motivated by the fear of disruption to ignore hard evidence. Isn't that a great metaphor for ESG? It isn't anti-business, it is just anti-short-term thinking. Just as Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos, who I believe are capitalists true to the bone, prioritize long-term, so does ESG. But there's a second point. Later in the movie, after the shark killed a swimmer, the mayor pulled the police chief to one side and confided, "My kids were on that beach too." The thing is, CEOs and shareholders are humans too. Well, at least humans sit somewhere in the shareholders chain. And just as the mayor kids were on the beach, many of us have kids and grandchildren who will be affected by climate change. Maybe even if the fiduciary duty of a company is to profit before anything else, there are limits to what humans are willing to sacrifice to this end. But there is a third point too, and this deviates from the movie Jaws, and that is that ESG is a business opportunity too. Anyway, it's enough about Jaws. Let's turn to this week's episode, which is ESG too siloed? And today, I'm being joined by three great guests, and co-hosting the show with me today is Aub Wallace. Hello, Aubrey.
Hi.
Good to have you here, Aub. Aub is the co-founder and strategist behind Dandelion Branding, a marketing agency dedicated to elevating the impact of social, environmental impact businesses. When she isn't working on a project, you can usually find her nosing about in the forest or giving congratulatory high fives to her plants for growing. So does that work? Do they appreciate these high fives? Aub?
Oh yeah, their leaves are like little hands, and then you like give them a little five, and it's like a little wind wiggle, and that just makes them a lot stronger.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. You should perhaps maybe take them dancing if things continue in that
I
direction.
definitely dance with my plants.
Well, that's good to hear. So can you tell us, what does Dandelion Marketing do?
Yeah, so Dandelion Branding is a digital marketing agency. Our focus is on storytelling primarily and elevating businesses that are part of the transition to a more sustainable world. I really have the privilege of building marketing strategies for both ends of the spectrum, where it's very cool new sustainability tech companies and also people really focused on uplifting nature's ability to regenerate, so regenerative farming folks. And so my job is pretty cool. I get to talk to them every day.
Well, I'm glad to hear you've got a cool job. I think presenting the ESG show is quite a cool job as well, actually.
Yeah,
and you do a podcast, and you do a podcast too as well, I think.
Yeah, yep. It's called Environmental with Dandelion. My Dandelion co-founder, Courtney Hume, and I operate it for the last couple of years. It's in all the major platforms. If you just search Environmental with Dandelion, you'll find us. But we primarily interview folks that are working in the sustainability transition about what they do in this like huge, awkward societal shift that we're in. Mostly it's for us, and you can pretty much see that in the show. But we get to learn about all different aspects of sustainability, and it's pretty cool.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, Aub is going to be co-hosting the show today, and I'd like to hand over to Aub at this point, who's going to introduce our second guest.
Yes. Thank you so much for letting me co-host today, Michael. I really appreciate you. But also, it's my honor to introduce Jessica Long on the show. Oh, wow. Pops right in.
Hello.
Jessica is the head of Ipsos, sustainability management. Say that again. Did I say that right? Ipsos?
Yeah. Ipsos
Okay,
sustainability management practice. Yep. It's a mouthful. You got it.
Yeah. Okay. She has nearly 20 years of experience in research, insight, and consultancy. Jess is an expert in sustainability and the circular economy. She is the head of ESG consulting for the Ipsos consulting arms, which is called Strategy 3, and supports businesses around the world with their sustainability challenges. She also had the privilege of showcasing Ipsos' latest insights at COP26 Blue Zone in Glasgow in 2021, which is really cool. And she completed Cambridge's Institute of Sustainability Leadership course in business sustainability management. She holds an MSc from the London School of Economics and has been featured in The Economist, The Financial Times, BBC World News Live, and a ton more. Thank you for all of the information you're putting into the world, Jess. And can you explain who is Ipsos and what do you do there?
Yeah, Ipsos is, I believe, the third largest research and consultancy agency in the world. If you work on the client side or in a corporate industry, you probably have heard of us, and you probably know us for our polling work, particularly in the UK. That's what we're quite known for. But beyond just research and polls and public opinion, we also have a dedicated management consultancy practice, and within that, a specialist team, which is what I head up on ESG and sustainability. And before I was in this role, I was the head of sustainability for our UK practice at Ipsos.
Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So I understand you do a lot of double materiality assessments. Yeah. Can you share what that entails? That's kind of a new-ish term in the world.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh gosh, another buzzword, another acronym, another, that this sector tends to be just dominated with the latest, whether you already brought up Regen Ag earlier. And I will say that there's still within the professional world debates around what some of these terms mean in practice, right? So I'm going to try to break that down, because really what we want to get to is tangible and strategic, actionable direction here with some of these topics. And so you might have heard a lot about double materiality assessments or ESG materiality assessments. Effectively, what it means is a business will come to us and they'll say, listen, and there's also ISSB regulations and different frameworks that have recommendations on how you do this. But they'll say, listen, we want to understand what our stakeholders think. So we'll ask the internal stakeholders this range of different ESG issues, and we'll ask them to effectively rank these issues on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10 on the impact to the business from a financial importance perspective. And then we will cross-reference that on a matrix by asking external stakeholders what they feel the impact of those issues are on people and planet. And what that does is effectively take you from just looking at something from an outside-in approach, so looking at how are these macro forces or ESG issues affecting financially, but also looking at a inside-out approach, so looking at how the business might impact the wider world or the people and planet. Is that clear?
Good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big topic, right? It's hard to do in a minute.
I'm trying.
Do it. I think that was a great way to sum it up. Thank you.
Okay. No problem.
And now I'm going to pass it back over to Michael.
Thank you very much, Aub. I've just swapped microphones, so I'm rather hoping everybody can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Oh, that's good news. So the microphone swap worked. We're also being joined today by Raj Ghosh. Hello, Raj. How are you today?
Hi, Michael. Hi, everyone. I'm doing good. Thank you. How are you?
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. So Dr. Raj is an award-winning sustainability ESG strategy consultant, advising clients on sustainable solutions in ESG risk, disclosure, governance, climate, and decarbonisation with over 10 years of experience. He has held several roles at the University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent University, UK, including that of a researcher, co-author, PhD scholar, and sustainability lecturer. He also served as a visiting scholar at the University of Kassel, Germany, and as a researcher at the University of Derby, UK. As a Parlia mentor, he delivered a social integration project under the guidance of a serving British MP. He's also a mentor to aspiring students and professionals entering sustainability. Dr. Raj has also published book chapters and articles on management controls for sustainability in several journals. His latest co-author publication on the topic of sustainable management will be released on this month. In free time, Raj enjoys cooking, traveling, gardening, and photography. So, Dr. Raj, can you tell us very briefly, can you describe the book and your contribution to it?
Sure. Thank you so much. So would be delighted to talk to you about the book very briefly, and thank you for the introduction. So the book basically embeds sustainability across different management genres, including sustainable marketing, HR, operations, supply chain, reporting, climate change, peacekeeping, stakeholder engagement, and so on. It has been endorsed by the United Nations under the Prime Principles, and it promotes sustainable thinking. It comes with ready-to-use seminars, a bunch of videos, and recommended reading lists alongside short case studies. The book has been co-authored by a number of internationally acclaimed academics under the editorship of Professor Petra Malden-Hill, who is a professor at Nottingham Trent University. And it was actually released just yesterday, so it's very fresh, and comes with a promotional code, EFL02, and it is titled Sustainable Management, a complete guide for faculty and students. And it basically increases the educational value as well as the awareness that you identified from the results of the survey. So my chapter was specifically on sustainability reporting. Here we explore the evolution of sustainability reporting, the different forms it can take, prominent standards like GRI and CDP, assessing the quality and content of sustainability reporting, greenwashing that you also mentioned during the introduction, and shadow reporting. So how to identify greenwashing through sustainability reporting, limitations, advances, as well as theoretical perspectives that basically explain the growth of sustainability reporting across different boundaries. Yeah, over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much for that. Well, we'll be talking to you again very, very soon. At this point in the show, we have a quick look at some of the recent news stories. And there was a piece in ESG today, a few days ago, not today, ESG today, but not today. Republicans introduced new anti-ESG reporting and investing laws. What on earth's going on here?
Yeah, so I think if we're going to talk about ESG being too siloed, this is a really good place to start with the US political system, right? So right now, there are several anti-ESG bills in Congress that are basically a scattershot effort to stop the impact of new sustainability regulations, like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that's coming in with the European Union, I think early next year. This is specifically on US companies, and they're largely centered around First Amendment rights of what we have to say or what you can choose what to say. This is so far as even Congressman Ralph Norman is quoted in this article as saying, ESG is an evil pollutant that must be eradicated from corporations and businesses. That's a lot. That is more than a legal issue. It is very intense disgust. That is emotional. And the reality is that we just don't have time for this to be this emotional. We're in the middle of a very real crisis, and businesses have a lot of power over the health of our planet. And this fight, this silo, if you will, has gotten so nasty that one of the most powerful governments in the world has fallen way behind in solving climate issues.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I completely agree with you. Like, I think, we're talking about ESG as a silo here, but innately it is pitted, particularly in the US, which tends to be more of a latent country in its development and progress around sustainability compared to in terms of public understanding compared to other countries. It's innately pitted against financial interest. And I know you're going to speak to Raj a lot more about this later on. But there's two things that really strike me here. One is this idea that we're missing ESG as an opportunity, and we're also not linking the clear threat that's there for beyond just the environment, but we are part of that environment. I think it's something like climate change will impact GDP by 18%, I believe, by, was it 2050, or in terms of shrinking the economy based upon the threats and everything, what's unfolding before us. The other that I find even probably more interesting, probably from a social science perspective, is this idea around party politics and dividing and conquering the issue, because now it has become, a threat to our planet shouldn't be something that's right wing or left wing. But now it's become that, and in so demonizing, it's dividing and conquering, right? So it's this idea that we can't make progress. So we saw it with like the protesting of the Vietnam War, for example, and the othering of opposition as hippies and being anti-establishment, and therefore it's kind of dilutes the impact and the agency people have to actually speak up on these things. And that's really what's happening here, and it's a real shame because until we actually begin to depoliticize this issue, it's really difficult to make progress.
Yeah. I love that. And on the GDP, I spotted a piece from Steve Keen about the impact of climate change on our financial system.
Yeah, Steve Keen, he's an Australian economist, and he's very controversial. He's basically of the view, I think, that other fellow economists don't really understand money. I've followed him closely in the past. He's a very interesting guy. Anyway, what's he saying now?
So this one is really a doozy. It's another really great example of how siloed ESG information actually is. So in a nutshell, economists have been saying that climate change, even up to 6 degrees, won't have a massive impact on the economy. That just does not make sense. It's just simply doesn't. If scientists are saying that 5 degrees is literally beyond catastrophic, how is it possible that our economy, which is largely based on the continued availability of our planet's natural resources, won't be impacted? Steve Keen, he released a whole paper on this. That's what this is about. And it sums it up really nicely. He says in a quote, "In reality, the threats from climate change are utterly unique in human history and dwarf the importance of all other risks to our financial, economic, and social systems." He also calls on stakeholders, governments, investors, and regulators to make decisions on climate policy based on science.
Yeah, I find this really, it seems so obvious, but I think and I think they call it out as well, that pension funds actually have a fiduciary responsibility and duty to correct erroneous predictions and assumptions, particularly when it affects the consumer. And I think that's what's happening with pension funds right now, and that's not being considered. That's something that we're just not taking into account. But it's not just pension funds are one example. By and large, we see still this obsession from industry, and I get it time and time again because I work with some of the biggest corporate multinationals out there, and they'll say to us, the more latent ones in their journey will say, well, I still want to see the ROI on sustainability. The consumers still aren't paying. They're still not paying for this. Yeah. And the fact that we're not seeing it as from a business imperative perspective, I think that's really what needs to change. We're never going to get a CEO of $1 billion corporation to actually bypass what they feel is financially important to them, but they need to be able to understand that this has become a business priority. And at its heart, it's impacting the economy, and it will impact the economy. We need to take that into consideration. And again, going back full circle to what Mike was saying before, is we need to shift again from just this immediate short-termism that's already here. Look at the summer we're having, into more of a long-term strategy game as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you think these people who are trying to practically, make life very difficult for ESG, and the economists who make these crazy claims, are they a little bit like the mayor in Jaws? Then, not believing that there's a shark. Is that the problem?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things going on here. If you look at So if you look at the US, right, and you see, and let's take the US and the UK. I'm actually dialing in from the UK. I've been here 13 years, and I've had kind of the privilege of living in both cultures because I'm American as well. You have the US, which is latent, not seeing the connection to finances. Then you have Rishi Sunak, who is with the North Sea oil and commissioning 100 different licenses in oil and gas. But the worst bit about it isn't that he's necessarily just doing that, is that he's greenwashing in the process. So he's trying to say that, well, actually, domestic oil is 1/4 carbon footprint from external oil, and in 2050 is still a quarter of our supply is actually still going to be oil and gas. So we need to do this. And actually, you can manipulate numbers all you want, but the sad bit is trying to pursue oil and gas now rather than focusing on a green revolution is very counterintuitive, and it's very manipulative. And then that's not a party thing. That's not me saying, oh, all conservatives this or that, because I don't like that. But it is it's unfortunate that that's the other extreme of is trying to utilize this greenwashing or justify what you're doing against the environment by manipulating the numbers, and that's frustrating to me.
There's one other point, and time is against us, and it's not a scheduled thing we're going to talk about. It just occurs to me. Rishi Sunak was also criticised for flying by private jet, and I'm not convinced by that. I kind of feel the answer to climate change isn't to stop business executives and politicians from flying by private jet, is to invest in alternatives, is to invest in electric planes that fly short distances and hydrogen for longer flights, and is to change the system. I'm not convinced that lecturing people because they travel by private jet helps, or do you disagree with that?
Who's that towards?
It's to anyone who wants to answer.
I have thoughts that go on up.
I think it's both. I feel like people who are able to afford a private jet and that can step into that world should be investing in electric private jets for their short distance, and hydrogen fuel, like sustainable aviation fuel, is already being developed, and there's not enough investment there. So I think adding more private jets to the airways that are burning oil and gas isn't necessary.
Okay.
I think the frustrating bit is these are some of the leaders that have claimed net zero pledges, and yet they're flying private jets. And I think where you can, it's a fine line, because we don't want to discourage. There is something called flight shaming that's coming up, particularly amongst Nordic countries, amongst more Gen Z, younger populations. I think there's a danger because there's huge lessons to be learned by traveling, right? And also, you don't want to shame immigrants. For example, I live in the UK, right? And I want to go and travel home to see my family, and that's a very difficult thing. I work in sustainability, right? At the same time, I don't think it necessarily falls on the consumer. We have no other choice. But when you are in a position of power, like Rishi Sunak, or when you're in a position of power as a CEO, you have a message that you send in terms of, and that leadership, particularly with private jets, is very, very frustrating. And I think that they need to put their money where their mouth is, and they need to actually Yeah, I mean, for example, COP26, the number of people that flew in for that, right? Or COP27, you know, we fly in all around the world for these sustainability meetings. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So it's a fine line, but I think when you're in a leadership perspective, or leadership position rather, there is different expectations.
Okay,
If
thanks.
I may come in here, just one quick point. I think what the problem here is the ethical decision, whether it's an ethical issue, and whether, as practitioners, we should abide by those ethical issues or theories that we adhere to. For example, our deontology. So deontological ethics prohibits us from doing something that harms the environment, for example. So I think it comes down to the individual and their ethical priorities.
Okay, so look, I've been a bit of a naughty boy this morning. I thrown in a couple of questions, and as a consequence, we're running way over time. Are you guys happy if we push on to the next section? And we were going to talk about a couple of other news items, and this is something you burningly want to talk about. I thought we'd move on to the next section. Are you okay with that?
It's great.
Okay.
Sure.
So at this stage, I'm going to be having a quick chat with Dr. Raj. And he's going to talk about something called the sustainability phase-based model. So, Dr. Raj, what is that?
Sure, thanks, Michael. So it is a model that basically helps us to identify the strategic positioning of any company vis-a-vis the environment and society. So it helps in categorizing a company and identifying its current sustainability strategies, approach, and business model. So it is a continuum that begins with the denial phase towards a more proactive stance. So the model considers all dimensions of sustainable development, that is environment, economic, social, and governance, and identifies sustainable development as a gradual process where a company evolves over time as it progresses along a continuum of compliance towards full sustainability. So it basically promotes an integrated view of sustainable development, considering all stakeholders, the environment, the governance aspects, as well as the economic dimension of sustainable development. So it begins with the denial stage, where the company is non-responsive to changes in the environment and society. And then it goes on to the compliance stage, where the companies start complying with environmental and social and human related laws of the country. Then it goes towards the efficiency stage, where picking out the low hanging fruit happens, and then more towards the proactive stage, towards full sustainability. So, so basically, we see value erosion at the denial stage. At the compliance and efficiency stage, we see that there is value preservation. And beyond that, there is an attempt for value augmentation. So basically, higher the ESG maturity, the greater the possibility of integration. So if I were to give you a very quick example, taking into account just the environmental aspect, so at the compliance stage, the company will be primarily complying with relevant pieces of environment related legislation. When it goes to the phase two, that is the efficiency stage, the focus is more on emphasis given to recycling, reusage, and reduction of wastage, and better resource utilization. At the proactive stage, it's basically developing products based on ecological capabilities and innovation that benefits the environment. And at the full sustainability phase, the focus is on collaboration. So if the focus is on collaboration and partnership for regenerative actions for ecological capital. And if we look at the social dimension at the compliance stage, the social dimension is basically complying with the relevant workplace related legislation. At phase two, which is the efficiency stage, it's more about augmenting staff development programs through training. And at the proactive stage, it is more about engaging with different stakeholder groups. And at the final stage of sustainability, it is about collaboration and partnership for regenerative actions that has a positive impact on human capital. So there is a focus on the future generation. So we are not only focusing on the current generation, but we are also focusing on the future generation when a company reaches the full sustainability phase. Over to you, Michael.
Okay, thank you for that. We've been lots of comments coming through, which we'll deal with shortly. How does this differ from other ESG models?
Sure. So other models do not offer an integrated way of studying business models. So these frameworks either look at the environmental dimension or the social dimension. So that is, these models treat sustainable development in silo, that is, in isolation from each other. So in contrast, the Bain et al. Model that I touched upon, it takes a holistic approach to capture each of the four dimensions of sustainable development. For example, Gago and Antela in 2004 in their paper, they just focused on the environmental aspects, whereas Freeman in his 1984 paper, they solely focused on the social aspects in their models. But Bain et al. Goes a step forward and they integrate all the four dimensions of sustainable development in their sustainability phase-based model. Over to you, Michael.
Okay, and you also mentioned to me the other day something about repurposing the term ESG to ESG. And what do you mean by that?
Sure. So you see, sustainable development has four dimensions. So economic, environmental, social, and governance. Within social, you have different stakeholder groups, customers, suppliers, employees, and so on. Within the environment, you have the different subtopics like water, waste, energy, biodiversity, emissions, etc. So for sustainable development to happen, all these four aspects are necessary. A company requests their financial resources to enable environmental and social investment. So we need to think holistically and how each of these dimensions are interdependent and integrated, which brings us to the integrated value creation model that comprises six capitals, not just the financial capital, but manufactured capital, environmental capital, social capital, relational capital, human capital, intellectual capital, in addition to financial capital. And each of these capitals are interdependent on each other. So as we get on the continuum of the model that I mentioned before towards more full sustainability, more holistically, we are taking an integrated thinking approach. That is, it relates to the systems thinking approach, understanding the interdependencies between each of the six capitals: human, environment, social, relational, economic, intellectual, and manufactured. The higher the interdependencies, greater is the integration and less silo. So the gradual progression can be explained by the resource-based view of the firm. That is, as companies continue to learn and upskill and enhance their capacity and capabilities, the more their ability to progress along the continuum towards full sustainability. So building capability is time intensive and is an outcome of collective organizational learning and knowledge gathered through the organizational experience. It is about employee upskilling and the augmentation of human capital. And the resulting resource that comes out of this process is hard to imitate due to the socially complex nature of its being, an outcome of engaging multifunctional human resources over time. So basically, this gives an advantage to the company that is sustainable in nature and gives a competitive advantage through which the company can create additional value that is inimitable by other competitors. So essentially, what we are looking at through the EESG model is a holistic thinking, and which forms the basis of systems thinking. And that sustainable development requires both environmental, social governance, as well as economic dimensions and resources. Yeah, over to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks for that, Raj. We are getting a little pushed for time, and I did want to allow time to deal with questions from the audience. Jessica, I think you might have had a point about concern about too many acronyms.
Yeah. I like Dr. Raj's model. I think the watch out is with all these acronyms, the SDGs, the PPP, people, planet, profit. I've even heard of people, planet, profit, peace, and partnership. I've heard of everything, right? The challenge is that we're seeing, again, and I think you highlighted at the beginning, a cherry picking of some of these terms. To me, the economic, particularly from the private sector, is always the bottom line for most of them. And I have concerns around the intersectionalities of how we communicate that and how we frame that in conversations. For example, a couple of years ago, we had 200 children dying in Pakistan due to the floods and climate change. Is that a social issue? Is that an environmental issue? We recently had a child here in the UK die from pollution. Is that a social issue? Is that an environmental issue? How do we acknowledge this is and how do we prevent this, again, sequestered kind of approach that the environment is somehow separate from us and our best interest? And I don't have an answer for that. But I think as we discuss these acronyms, I think the focus on intersectionality, maybe even through overarching terms like planetary health, what's good for the planet is good for people. How do we begin to bridge that divide? That's, to me, where the focus needs to lie.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we're probably going to drift over a few minutes this morning in order to do the group discussion justice, because I don't want to ignore questions from the audience either. And I'd like to have a quick look at some of those questions now. Excuse me while I lean over. Scott Sivright, the former guest on this show, says economics also needs to leads to sustainable economics, not the economics of growth. We need to include all costs to environment, natural and human capital. Sad to say, this also includes a dimension of social redistribution, not just bigger and bigger corporations. I don't know if anyone's got any comments. I don't know with Aub if you want to join us at this point, but please speak up if you have any observations to make. Kishore says, it's said that the model of sustainability, especially in the South, is sustainable underdevelopment. Your inputs on this? How does Professor, you've been promoted, Biswaraj, model cover this?
Sure. So I can take a call on this. So sustainable underdevelopment. So this basically recognizes that sustainable development is a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It's a time-consuming affair. So the model appropriately covers this because you start from a continuum of reactive strategies. It could be the company could be non-responsive on one hand, and on the other hand, on the basis of the ESG maturity of a given company, they could be at the full sustainability level as well. So, and this can happen with any entity at any given location. So it all depends on the level of ESG maturity a company has reached or are planning to reach.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Lynn Hickman said, this best description of double materiality yet. Are you finding more and more companies wanting to invest in knowing their impact on the planetary's boundaries? Please speak up if anyone have any observations to make on that. I hate to say this.
I was going to say, I think that was in response to double materiality from Jess, but I know in Dandelion, we're seeing a lot of people coming through and asking. I even passed somebody over to Jess yesterday about getting to know their more information about their own impact, their scopes 2 and 3 in particular. I think people have been more and more interested in learning about. That's from what I see.
I think as well, it's important as these new measurement techniques and things come forward for us to be super critical. And there are criticisms around materiality. And one of them is that they're perception based. You're asking internal and external stakeholders what their perceptions are. And at Ipsos, we have one of the largest share of volume around consumer insights because we're a polling agency and we have so much going on. We're able to actually acknowledge that there's what's called a believe true gap. So moving the barometer from say do to believe true, but people don't understand this space, right? So, 7 in 10 globally, for example, feel the most impactful thing you can do is recycle. Right? Less than 9% of what you put in your recycle bin in the UK actually gets recycled. So how do you make sure you could do it double materiality? You can do it ISSB compliant, but importantly, let's then go validate what actually was said. Before you put your whole strategy towards what people think, let's make sure it's actually impactful. And that comes down to the integrity and the DNA of the business itself.
Okay. Now, I hate to say this because we've got some great questions, and I love to do more justice. I'll just quickly refer to them. Len Studevant says that there's an issue with narcissists. It's a real threat to ESG. I don't know about narcissists, but I wish I could find my mirror. And Dawn Rennick, who is going to be appearing as a guest on the show later this year, system thinking needs to incorporate design justice principles in it to ensure the new way. I think we need to quickly push on now to our group discussion. Is ESG too siloed? And Jess, can you explain to us why you think this is an issue?
Yeah, can I respond to the narcissism question in 10 seconds?
You certainly can.
I think that actually can also be a huge opportunity, because identity is one of the biggest things that in the climate change movement where friction is involved for behavior change. For example, driving an electric vehicle or getting a solar panel put on your roof, you're more likely to do something if there's a status or identity kickback for it. So we can actually change narcissism and look for the positive and how we can actually leverage behavior change en masse for some of these more friction-led activities. In terms of is ESG too siloed? I think it is. I think sometimes I want to challenge this notion around, is sustainability actually the terminology kind of dead? If you look at Patagonia, for example, they're not talking about sustainability. They're saying we actually need to be positive, nature positive, net positive. Maybe we need to do more than just be sustainable. I kind of worry about death by acronyms and death by frameworks, although I completely get the importance of having them from a measurement compliancy standpoint. But for me, the movement is headed towards a more planetary health angle. How do we take all the aspects that Dr. Raj mentioned and make sure that those are accounted for in the intersectionalities of moving forward with the environment, society, people, and planet hand in hand?
Okay, thank you. On the subject of narcissism, just be grateful we don't have any narcissist politicians. I mean, that leaves any of them, don't we? Dr. Raj, would you like to add to Jessica's comments?
Sure. So my take on the statement would be what I see in my role as a consulting assistant manager at Unicus Consulting is that there is a genuine attempt made by companies, at least the ones I work with, to promote a holistic view of sustainable development. It is also because these companies might be at a higher stage of ESG maturity, and these companies undertake materiality assessment at regular intervals and also engage with different stakeholder groups to identify salient materiality topics. So basically for me, this translates into companies taking a more balanced approach on E, S, and G, and communicating on the same through their sustainability report. So for me, I see it from a positive angle that yes, some companies are taking it seriously and there is no attempt for greenwashing. Yeah, that's my take.
Thank you. And Aub, any comments?
Yeah, I think, I agree with both Dr. Raj and Jessica. I come from even a further out point of view on this, I think, is that I talk with business owners and folks involved in the sustainability transition every single day. And everyone is different, but one thing that is really similar throughout everyone I speak with is that everybody feels a bit lonely. They kind of feel like they're on an island trying to save the world, trying to put their best foot forward and make an impact. And there are so many people out there separated, and it's hard to talk to each other. And we come from a culture also that very much puts people in silos and compartmentalizes people. That is actually how human nature, how we evolved to be such a large species, right? We were able to say, you do this job and you do that job and you go forage, and we have kept that mentality. And now we need to bring it back into a more community-based space. And I think that's where I see the movement going, is folks working towards an interdisciplinary approach also, and just talking to each other.
Okay, Thank you for that. Now, when I think of silos, I think of compartments and compartmentalization, I suppose. How, Jessica, does that impact upon reporting?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a massive issue that reporting is one of the biggest challenges, right? It's such a massive issue, so you have to kind of break it up so that it is actually tangible. The challenges with reporting are more about self-reporting, and I mean, this is how we had like Boohoo, one of the fast fashion brands. I think they were ranked quite favorably in terms of social impact, and actually is nothing further from the truth. So how do we actually get past that? I think that's just a huge challenge, because the nature of the industry, the size of the business, the country or / market that they operate in, is all going to affect what those benchmarks are and what those targets are, and that's the challenge. So I think the only way around it is, how can we actually go from a compliance and reporting, and how do we unite that with strategy? And that's the proactivity that Dr. Raj is talking about. So rather than sitting, because a lot of the times they sit in complete separations within a business, how do we actually get them to work together?
Okay, thank you. What about in communication? How is ESG siloed in communication?
So I'm actually really interested in this, and I think this conversation that we're having right now is a good example. We've covered a lot of topics here, and they have all assumed that everyone listening spends a lot of time following the topic of sustainability throughout the world. And I'm part of this conversation, and I think that these are really important, but we've talked about everything from politics to having too many acronyms to sustainability reporting, ESG reporting, and we've been critical of a lot, and we've introduced new ideas. Like Dr. Raj dropped a book yesterday. All of that is amazing and important and vital for those of us that are on the front lines of sustainability, that are doing the work, but we aren't doing the best job of making sure that it's easy to follow for all those people and businesses and CEOs and the narcissists that haven't identified that as sustainable yet. All those people bringing up the rear. I think that we're getting better at it, but this is something that I think we can improve on if we want to expand the scope of ESG.
Okay, thanks for that. I wonder, Dr. Raj, have you anything to add to the discussion?
I think I've shared my views on this. Yeah.
Okay. Look, we have run way over. What I think I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to give each of you a minute to sum up your thoughts. If there's anything important that we haven't covered, mention it. Or do you want to kick off?
Sure. I'll just say that if we want to change the world, we have to do it together. We have to have everybody involved. I don't necessarily think that the silos are a bad thing. I think they're important because that's how humans learn. That's how we get deeper into, what we know and how to make change. I do think we need to do a better job of elevating it to a place where it is easily understood by the mass of people, because there's 7 billion of us on this planet, and we all need to be moving in the same direction to make change as fast as it needs to happen in order to do something about the climate crisis.
Thank you. Jess, any comments?
I think we have to silo to some degree. I wouldn't say that it's not a bad thing, though. I think it often promotes competing strategies, from what I see firsthand dealing with industry and governments and organizations. And often you're forcing, for example, consumers into trade-offs. For example, you might have organic produce, but it's wrapped in packages. So now you have your rather than taking a best for planet, best for individual people standpoint, you're forcing them to choose one between the other. And I think we see that time and time again. So I feel like we do need a more integrated approach fundamentally, although with reporting, as I've mentioned, that becomes very tricky with silos. But I do come at it from a different perspective. I don't think that there's a solid answer. I think we keep the conversation going. I think more than anything, we remain hypercritical of the conversation as we go forward, and we look for that cross-sectionality, including the economic angle, and we look to shift the conversation so that fundamentally the environment stops being pitted against financial interests. in terms of the ideology and conversation.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Raj, your turn.
Sure,
60
Michael.
seconds,
So,
and then we just go.
okay. So I completely agree with Jessica and Aub's viewpoint, but I also want to add a few more comments here. So what is required now is education and awareness. So our educational model needs to incorporate lessons on sustainability at the primary as well as higher education levels. And that's where we think our book on sustainable management can play a vital role in promoting a holistic view of sustainability. And the book also comes with a chapter helping business schools how to embed sustainability education within the curriculum. And all the major topics that we discussed today is there in the book on sustainable management. So strategy, triple bottom line, sustainability reporting, systems thinking, all of this you will find in the book. And to have a final comment, yes, we for sustainable development we need to focus on all the 4 dimensions, and the systems thinking approach can help us definitely. And the companies also need to focus on augmenting their capacity and their knowledge as they go ahead on the continuum towards more proactive strategies and business models. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, everybody. Unless anyone's got anything urgent they want to scream out, I think we're going to have to go now. Speak now if ever hold thy peace. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. See you again next week when we'll be going to be focusing on diversity. See you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.